Hello and welcome back. So I did a very quick first episode, and that was to get the IDE, which we're going to use Visual Studio. It also went very quickly over Git. I didn't explain anything about Git, but we obtained the Git client, which was GitHub Desktop, and we will use that to kind of stay in sync with our code bases. And so let's go from here. And so we can see here in the lesson plan, our first program, Hello World. So we will get right into it. So Hello World, while I'm going to open Visual Studio, I think you should have Visual Studio installed. If you do, you should be able to open it, and we will create a new console application. You can excuse me, you can keep, using your regular, just the way I'm going to start. And then from here, if you'd like to use Git, then when I go to push and pull, I'll explain what those are and what they do and how they can help you. But for now, there's really nothing for you to pull because we don't really have a project. So we'll start now. So I'm going to make a new project. Real quick before we start, I will explain Hello World. It is like the very first program that pretty much everybody writes, and it's a very simple program, and its entire purpose is to show you basically just how the whole program kind of fits together with the code files. So let's just start it, and then maybe we'll see if you can see what I'm saying. So we'll do create a new project. So once our new project window opens, we can select from a list over here. You might not have all of these. You might have more than these. It depends on what you selected when you installed. But what I want to do is just your console app. So I clicked Get Started up at the top, console app, and we're going to name it just Hello World is fine. I'm going to name mine Lesson 2 Hello World. So I have Lesson 2 Hello World. I'm going to change the location. I already have a folder set up, and it's got the Git init set up in there so that when I make changes, I can push them up to the server, and then you guys can download them. So let me go down to Teach Me Mobile, and we will go to GitHub, and I will put it here. And so the solution name will be Getting Started. No. C# Beginner. So that'll be the solution. The project name will be Lesson 2 Hello World. And that should do it. So I'm going to actually remove Lesson 2 because as I think we will get further into it, and we might just keep Hello World, but then go into the next lessons with the same project. So that will be okay. So we have C# Beginner as the solution name. I put it into the folder that I have set up, and the name for our project is Hello World. So I'm going to press OK, and it's going to take a little while to set up our entire project, and once it sets up our project, we can get started. So I guess we'll watch as Windows does its thing and loads Visual Studio. So I do mobile development professionally, and when I have to load, so one thing I don't like about Visual Studio, when you have to load new projects, existing projects, as big as they are, it takes forever to load. And so this one was actually pretty quick. So what this does is it opens it up, and it actually, Visual Studio knows that Hello World is your first program, and so it actually already did all the work for us. So instead of writing it, I have to just explain it. It would have been much better to write it. So I'm actually going to delete this because in the very slim and off chance that yours doesn't have this, we pretty much want to write it so that you can go over it. But this knows that we are kind of new. The code provided will print Hello World to the console, and then you can press this to debug or run it without debugging. So what we're going to do is we're just going to follow those directions. So you can press Control F5, or you can just click this arrow up here. So you have start, and what start does is runs your program. And so I'll explain as much as I can about the editor here, but for now, we have the basics, let's just run the basics and see how it goes. So we'll click this down arrow and we'll click start. You could just also click start by itself. Sometimes there's more options, especially when we get later into the mobile development. You'll have a lot of options for the different devices you can run on or the different emulators. And so mine has started. I'm going to move the window over here and we can see Hello World printed to the console. And so that's all we really wanted. And so this is your executable program. So without writing a single line of code, you have a program. So that's pretty neat. Where we're going to go from here is get into the very basics of C#. First, we're going to go over the Visual Studio Editor. From there, we will check out, the fundamentals of programming using C#. And so each language follows the same fundamentals, but the language has its own syntax, and those syntax change it between languages. But we're going to stick with C#. And so we can either press enter. That's what this does, which I'll explain as we go. We can press enter to close the program, or you can press the X. And so either way, the program exited, everything went well. We call it a win. So that is the Hello World program. But what we are going to do, we will leave these two lines, and we're going to delete everything else. So let's go ahead and delete this bottom green line, and we'll delete the top two lines. And so what we're left with is actual codes, the bare, skin and bones of the program. And so now we have something to get started with. So if you're here, if you did everything I've done so far, then you see this Visual Studio window. And so what Visual Studio does is kind of provides you all the tools you need to write software. So at the top, we have a menu up here. We're not going to get into it right now, but we don't really need to use a lot of these options, but they're there for you if you need them. And as we go, we might find some things we'll need. On the left is your toolbox. You could also, it could be your Server Explorer. I would leave this open, because you could close it, but I would leave it open just because later you're going to be using it a lot. But for this intro stuff, you're not going to be using it at all. I would leave it there because as you work in this environment, you start to get used to things and things start getting comfortable. And so you should leave it open so that you get comfortable with it being there, because eventually you're going to want it there. So on the bottom, you have your output. This window kind of has these tabs at the bottom, and these tabs will grow as more information becomes available, or if you want to start watching different variables. So the two main ones which they put on here for you automatically is the output and the error list. So as you're writing code, error list will keep updating every time you do something to let you know if something's not right. Just as an example, you don't have to type this because it's not going to mean anything, but if we were to just type something, it'll get a red line, and it'll say, hey, you don't have this semicolon and this name doesn't exist. So error list will keep telling you things that are wrong as you go. And so it's a kind of a good reference point to look at every now and then. And then your output is on execution. On code execution, it'll just give you information about your program. So that's it for the bottom. On the right, we have the Solution Explorer and the properties. And so properties pertain to the files themselves, whereas the Solution Explorer is that solution we created at the beginning. We called it C# Beginner. And in that solution, we named this console app Hello World. And so the project is Hello World. And then the solution, which is kind of this umbrella for many projects or just one project, it's up to you, but it says up here, one project. We can keep adding more projects. Typically in the solution, you want to only add projects that all kind of work together, right? And so then you can update one thing, and if you need to check into another project and update later, you can do that. So, but that's it. It's very normal to put, you just one project in a solution and continue from there. It's no big deal. So there's the very quick, basic walkthrough for Visual Studio. As you use it, it'll stop looking so complicated and daunting, and it'll start to get more familiar, and you'll kind of know where to go. And there's also keyboard shortcuts we'll go over. But without going too much into all these hypotheticals and things that we will get to eventually, I want to get to the stuff we're going to get to now. So the stuff we're going to get to now is the fundamentals of C#. It'll actually kind of be the fundamentals of programming in general. We're going to use C# as that vehicle to learn. And so when you create your first project, we're going to have this code file. And so C# code files end in .cs. And so what we have that the Visual Studio gave us when we created the console app is program.cs. So opening this file, which Visual Studio opens for you, you'll see that you have a namespace, and I already know all of this stuff. If you're not familiar with it, looks very crazy. What are these symbols and all this? It's okay. As we go, as you kind of work with it and interact with it, it'll get more and more familiar. And there are a lot of visual indicators that kind of help make these things make sense, like these dotted lines. So these dotted lines we will get into on how they work in your favor as the developer. Okay, so now that we're into this C# file, so we'll see we have a namespace, and in this namespace, so the namespace starts with this curly bracket and ends with this curly bracket, and Visual Studio will highlight them in blue for you. And then you can click this one, and you can see that class program starts with this curly bracket and ends in this curly bracket. And we can do the same for static void main. Starts with this curly bracket and ends with that curly bracket. So they'll highlight blue for you and tell you everything that's within something called a scope. So we're going to get into scopes very, very soon in this actual video. But for now, let's work from the center out. So we'll start with static void main. Static void main is this very special method that has to be included in every program. And so this is the entry point where software executors, or they'll look and they'll start your program with this static void main. So in the static void main, your first line of actual code that's executable is this console.writeLine hello world. And so when we press start and we run the program, we'll see console will pop up and we'll see hello world. Then it goes to this next line of code and it says console.readLine, read key. And what read key does is looks for any key that you press on your keyboard. So when you press a key, it'll register that. There's no more code to execute, so we'll get to this end of scope and the program will close. Console is highlighted in green, very similar to program, because it in itself is a class, which we will get to. So this class has methods that you can call and work with, and they will do things for you. So WriteLine does something for you. It writes something to that black window. Read key does something for you. In that black window, which is a console, it will look for interaction from the user, whether it be a keyboard key or the enter key, anything like that. So getting into the actual programming part. The first thing we need to do is talk about comments. They're probably the most boring, but they're the most helpful for sure. And so when we talk about comments, the most common comments are with 2 slashes. So when you have 2 slashes, that line turns green if you have it to the default theme. And so that green line, anything that is after a comment, this entire line does not get read by the compiler when it goes to execute and compile your code. So you can write anything you want in here and nothing bad happens. The benefit of it is you can keep track of what you're doing, maybe your thought process on the code you're writing, and you can write it here in the comments. And so we're going to talk about in the comments what we're trying to do or what we're trying to achieve. Maybe leave some notes about the thought process on the logic of the code you write after it. And so we can refer back to our lesson plan, and then we can move these into comments. 1 second. So sorry, I was getting a dry throat. Anyway, so moving into this. So you have our lesson plan says our first program, Hello World. My goal, I wanted to type that out and show you how writing code turns into a program. Unfortunately, Visual Studio did it for us. So we'll move right into the next lesson, which is variables. What are those? And so we're going to go over variables. I'm going to go kind of as slow as in depth as I can. And if you're already very familiar with videos, you can skip past this part. I'm so sorry, not videos, variables. If you're already familiar with variables, you can skip past this part. But the goal here, my goal is to take somebody who has no idea about programming and try to teach them, what they need to know to eventually get into the profession. So start with comments. We'll say this is a comment, and you can type this in. And so this is a comment. It doesn't affect the program that we already had. So we can press start again, and the same thing will happen. It'll load up this black window on the wrong screen. It keeps doing that. No problem. So that black window will show Hello World, and it'll wait for a key press. So we'll press enter, and it'll end because it has no more code to execute. So we'll leave this is a comment. But we're going to put a comment under it, and we're going to say, let's get into variables. You don't have to type this because this isn't an actual good comment that you want to put into code. This is kind of just me describing what we're going to be getting into. And so let's get into variables. And so you have different types of, there's these things called data types. So data types, and this you can type, data types. So you have, these are very common. You'll use them all the time. And so it's definitely beneficial to type these in to try to get an understanding of what they are and what they do. And so the first one we will do is int. And let's name it age for now, and I'll explain all this in a second. So int age equals, and we'll just say, 25, whatever. And then make sure you put a semicolon at the end of that. And then let's talk about this. So right above that int age, I'm going to put a new line, and I'm going to say integers, and then a colon to say kind of that we're going to describe integers. And so integers are whole numbers. Let's make this on a new line itself. I'll do another space and a dash to make it kind of like a list. And so what are integers? So they're whole numbers. And these include things like 1, 200, blah, 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 big number, negative 200, 0, any whole number, positive or negative. There is a cap on how big your number can get. But for the use of integers in themselves, you're probably not going to get into that. But just know integers are whole numbers. That's the most important part of it. It's a whole number. It could be positive, could be negative. And so what we did here is we defined a variable. So the data type is int. And int is a keyword. That's why it's blue, and it means integer. And so we're defining a variable here. And so the way you define a variable, let's put this up here. So, whoops. All right, so defining variables. And so this is very important. You're going to do it every single day if you get into this profession or anything like that. So defining variables. The way you define variables, there's two ways. You can type them strongly, which is int age, for example. So strongly typed is like, int age equals 1, all right? But you can also let the compiler figure it out, and this is the easiest way, and it's very common. And so when you let the compiler figure it out, you use the word var, and that's a keyword just like int. But we get to use this for all data types, and it's very nice. So you could say var age equals 1, and the compiler will say whole number. Let's make this an integer. So int or var, and var is used for all other data types as well, even objects or anything you're going to store in a variable. Var is short for variable, and it lets the compiler know, hey, we're going to define a variable, and we're going to give it a name, we're going to assign it a value, and then you just tell me what you think it is. I'm going to tell you it's almost always right, and when it doesn't know, it'll tell you. So let's go from here. So you have defining variables, strongly typed int age equals 1. And so what you need to define a variable is a data type. I'm going to put these in square brackets. Data type. Then you need a space, and then a variable name. And then it's called an initializer. So initializer. And what this is like equals 1. And that's actually optional unless you use var. If you use var, it's required because the compiler needs to know what kind of variable this is. Regardless of what you're doing with it, it needs to know. So, and you can't, we'll get in that in a second. Anyway, so we have int age equals 1, and that, or int age equals 25. That defines an age variable, which is an int. We can hover over it and we'll see it's a local variable, int age. Okay? So another data type that you'll use all the time is string. And so string just means a sequence of text. It can be numbers, it can be letters, it can be anything like that, but it has to be in double quotes. And so string name, and then we'll initialize it as well, put it in double quotes, and we'll say, teach me mobile. Go outside of your double quotes, put a semicolon. So let's do that here. And then semicolon, because you always have to end lines of code, well, statements, with a semicolon, always. So if you don't, it'll tell you. Like if we do this, it'll say, hey, we expected a semicolon. And so you can even check your error list and see, hey, and then when you double click it, it'll bring you right to the line and you can go ahead and fix it. So this error list window or output window, both of these things we'll be using all the time. So we have int age equals 25. This is declaring and initializing a variable. Its data type is int, its name is age, and that's going to get confusing here. I'll try to explain that just a second longer on the next one. But data type int, name age, value 25. So on our second line, we said string name equals teach me mobile. String data type, name is name. Hope that's not confusing. We can name it anything we want, and then we'll initialize it with teach me mobile. So the reason they're called variables and not constants is because we can change it later. So we can go right into our console. We're going to use this a lot for learning. So just like we have it written below, we're going to say console. And you're going to see this window is called IntelliSense. As we use it and get familiar with it, it will make a lot more sense to you. But for now, let's just keep typing. So console dot, we're going to say right line. Let's just put age right there. Okay? And then we're going to do that read key again. So console dot read key, just like underneath. So make sure you do read key, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and that semicolon. Definitely need the semicolon. And so here's what we expect the program to do. I'm going to write it down here. You don't have to write it. This is just visual representation, but here's what we expect it to do. So a program starts. It reads, it skips all of this because remember, it does nothing with comments. So the very first line of executable code is creating a variable called age and assigning the value 25 to it. So, but what we see the program doing is not any of this. So the very first thing, let's go ahead and write what we expect it to do anyway. So it's going to create and assign, well, let's just type create variable age and assign value 25. Then it's going to create variable name and assign value teach me mobile. Then it's going to write in the black window. I'm going to stop calling it that very soon and just know that that is the console. So it's going to write in that black window just the value. So 25, because that's what we said. We said write age. And that says I'm going to give you a name of the variable that I have. Do something with the value. And so what it's going to do is write line, and the value that we set is 25. So it's going to write that in the window. Nothing before it. It's just going to be 25. Then it's going to sit there. It should wait for us to press a key. Let's to press a key. Okay, and then once we press something, it should print out hello world. So once we do press a key, the black window should show hello, no comma, world, exclamation. That's it, right? And then when we press another key, it should wait again. Whoops. It should wait again for us to press another key. And then once we do press another key, we expect the window to close. So let's see if it does exactly that. So we'll press start, not analyze. We'll press start. That window should probably going to open up in the wrong monitor. I'll move it over. I'll bring it over here, and we should see 25. We do. We see 25. So we'll press any key. I'll press space. And then we'll see hello world. So we expect that. That's what we kind of wanted to see. So we see hello world. That's what we expected. And so let's go through it. So program starts. Created those variables. In the black window, the console, we see 25. There it is. We pressed a key. Then it showed hello world. We're going to press another key now, and the window should close. So it does exactly what we expect. So let's delete all this comment. And we'll go up here, and we'll go through it. If you guys have any questions about anything, I guess I can't really ask that now since there's really nobody watching, but in the future, these will be on YouTube. If you have any questions, post comments under the video. I'll keep track of them, and I'll try to answer as much questions as I can. You can always catch the next stream to ask any questions that you had. I'll definitely ask questions as much as I can. But let's move on from here. So this should be pretty straightforward. So we're defining variables, we're kind of using the variables, and we're going from here. But what I want to show you now is that we're going to change the variable. So we're going to say age no longer equals 25. We're going to say it equals 26. It may have been their birthday. So let's say that console.writeLine, and we'll say happy birthday. Then we'll do the read key again. No, I'm not going to do the read key. We're going to say happy birthday. You are now, put a space, end that string. So that's with the double quote, ends the string. We're going to say plus, and then we're going to say age. Close the parenthesis and press a semicolon. So here's what I did. Console.writeLine, same as we've been doing, but I started a new string. This is called a literal because we're not storing it in a variable. So I started a new string. I said, happy birthday, you are now, and I ended that. Then what the compiler is going to, and I have a space here. That's a little bit important. If you miss that, it'll look weird. But there's a space in between now and the double quote. And so from here, we're appending or concatenating the value of age. And so it's going to say, happy birthday, you are now this many years old. We're not going to do a read key because we have one down here and it's not that important. So it'll say, happy birthday, you are now this, and then it'll say, hello world right away because we didn't do a read key. And so let's press start. I'll bring the window over here. We should see 25. So once I press the enter key, it should say, happy birthday, you are now 26 because we changed age from 25 to 26, but it'll still print 25 first. It did. Then it's going to come down here, change age to 26. It's going to write that again. Happy birthday, you are now space. It's going to concatenate age, the value of that to it. So that'll be 26. So that's what we expect to see. Happy birthday, you are now 26. So I'll press enter. We see it. Happy birthday, you are now 26. Since I didn't have a read key there, it went right to the next line, which was console.writeLine, hello world. After that, immediately after that is this console.readLine. Read key. And so it's going to wait until we press a key. After we do, there's nothing below that, and so the program should exit, and it does. It does exactly what we expect. So now we can do, just to show you kind of how variables and their values work. And so you have int as a data type. So let's add over here, we have strings. And so what strings are is any sequence of characters, which could be alphanumeric. It could be, I mean, it could be anything. It could be symbols. So it's just, call it what you want, numbers, letters, and then we'll say etc. because you could do symbols. So I'll say symbols, etc. So any sequence of characters, but must be surrounded by double quotes. And so that's super important. If you try to use single quotes, that's kind of reserved for something else called a char, which we'll get into. But they're not used as much as strings. Anyway, so you have integers, strings. Other numeric types are things called doubles. And so let's see what those do before we say kind of what they are. And so under string name equals teach me mobile, we're going to declare a new variable, so data type double. Here we're going to say money. And we'll say equals, and we're going to give it a value. And so this value is going to be 1,500, no commas or anything, just digits. But you have to put a period. Well, you don't have to, but doubles allow decimals. So period, and then, but it can't, if it ends in 00, that won't register. But what you can do is say like 15, right? Make sure you put your semicolon, and now we see double money equals 1,500.15. And so that carries over. And so if we, it'll retain those decimals. Ints cannot have a period, but doubles can. So what we can do is say, go ahead and tell me what my money is, right? So what's the value of money? I'm very familiar with the value of money is, but for this program. All right, so we'll press start. We'll move it over here, and it is just going to say 1,500.15. So that works great. I'm not going to go through this program. I'm just going to close it. So doubles. So what are they? They are decimal numbers. That's pretty much it. They're decimal numbers. So they allow big number in the front, then a decimal, and then big numbers behind it. So use doubles. Those are also frequently used. But now what we are going to do is look at this Var keyword and kind of why it's so awesome. And so we're going to define the same types. So the types we used were int, string, and double. Okay, we're going to do all of that with vars. So we're going to say var your age. And so what I did here is called Camel Casing. I did all lowercase like here, but when I started a new word, you can't do a space. But what you can do is start that first letter of the next word with a capital letter, and that makes it easier to read, and it's Camel Casing. So we can say your age equals, we're going to say you are 30, right? Semicolon. Then we can say var your name equals viewer, right? Semicolon. Not that L though. Then we can say var your money equals, and we're just going to go into some because you're super loaded, right? Dot 10. No, 11. Okay, and so now we can hover over these variables, and we can see your age is still an int. We can see that your name still a string. We can see that your money is still a double. So the compiler can check it while you're writing the code, and it kind of determine that this is an int because there's no period. This is a string because there's double quotes. This is a double because there's a decimal in it. And so that's what I kind of wanted to show you about variables. So that is going to wrap up this lesson on variables and what are those. And let's see what the next lesson is. I'm not going to do the next lesson next, but methods. Okay, this is going to be a long video because methods are kind of hard to get at first, but they definitely make sense as you use them. And again, we're going to use these a lot. So most of these very basic things, they're going to seem very daunting, very hard to work with, very hard to understand. You don't have to understand them right away. That's the great thing. As you follow along with these videos, by all means, feel free to ask questions. But as you follow along with these videos, we're going to be using these things every day, all the time. And so, it's like playing video games or doing anything that you love to do. The more you do it, the more it makes sense, the better you get at it. And so that's the purpose here. And so please, by all means, feel free to get a hold of me and ask about variables. Get ready for methods on the next one. I don't really have a schedule yet as far as how often I'll be making these videos, but I hope to be doing it frequently, 2 or 3 days a week. I'll be answering questions as much as I can if they come up. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe if you're watching these videos later. If you're here watching live, go ahead and give a comment, a follow, however this works on Twitch, and we'll go from there. So thanks so much for tuning in. Catch you next time.